You ate mustard on white bread and called it supper. So did the kid next door and the one across the street, and nobody talked about it until years later when somebody finally said the word out loud. Tight. Money was tight, and every black mother who heard it just nodded because she had been turning nothing into a full plate since before her kids could reach the counter. The sandwich at number 10 is so bare, it makes people stop and stare. At number 7, a tiny can that nobody admitted counted as dinner. And what happens at number 19 turns something most kitchens pour straight down the drain into a full plate. These were not failures, they were answers built by mothers and grandmothers who understood that an empty cabinet was a problem to solve, not a reason to quit. The food industry moved on. The families who made these plates did not. Hit subscribe because this is a history that starts at the kitchen table. Here are 25 meals black kids grew up eating when money was tight. Number 25, ketchup sandwich. 2 slices of white bread and a thick line of ketchup down the middle. No meat, no cheese, no lettuce, just the bread and the ketchup and a child who was hungry enough not to ask for anything else. This was the meal that showed up on the last day before the check came in, when the only things left in the kitchen were condiments and bread. Some children added a sprinkle of salt. Some folded the bread in half and ate it standing at the counter. The ketchup was cold and the bread was soft, and nobody called it dinner, but it was. A bottle of ketchup lasted for weeks, and it kept more children fed than any school lunch program in the country. Number 24, sweet rice. A bowl of leftover white rice reheated with a pat of butter and a spoonful of sugar stirred through it. Some families poured in a little milk and let it soften into something between cereal and dessert. Others ate it dry with the sugar crystals still visible on top. Sweet rice was what happened when the rice was the only thing left from yesterday and somebody had to turn it into a meal a child would eat without protest. It showed up at breakfast, at lunch, and at supper, depending on how far the week had stretched. The sugar made it feel like a treat. The butter made it feel like somebody cared. A child eating sweet rice at the kitchen table did not know the word for resourceful, but that is what was happening on the other side of the stove. Number 23, sardines and crackers. A tin of sardines opened at the kitchen table with a sleeve of saltine crackers beside it. The sardines came packed in oil or mustard sauce, and children pulled them out one by one with a fork or their fingers and laid them across the crackers. The smell was strong enough that some children ate outside on the porch, so it would not follow them back into the house. A single tin cost next to nothing and had enough protein to count as a real meal. The oil at the bottom of the can went on to the last few crackers, so nothing was left behind. Some families kept several tins stacked in the back of the cabinet for the weeks when every other option had already been used up. A child who grew up eating sardines on the porch steps could identify the brand by the color of the can before they could read the label. Number 22, crackers soaked in milk. A bowl of saltine crackers crushed into pieces with cold milk poured over them and a spoonful of sugar on top. This was cereal for the house that could not afford cereal. Children ate it with a spoon, and it tasted like nothing and everything at the same time. Because when you are hungry enough, cold milk and salt and sugar is a combination that works. The crackers went soft in under a minute. By the time you reached the bottom of the bowl, you were spooning up something that had gone past cracker entirely, and that was fine. A sleeve of crackers and a carton of milk could stretch this meal across 3 or 4 children without anybody going short. Number 21, canned mackerel patties. 1 can of jack mackerel, drained and mashed in a bowl with a beaten egg, diced onion, cornmeal, salt, and black pepper, shaped into flat rounds and fried in oil until both sides turned golden. Mackerel was the cheaper cousin of canned salmon, and in many households, it was the only canned fish that showed up regularly. The taste was stronger and the smell carried through the house, but fried with enough seasoning and enough heat, the patties held together and tasted like Friday night. Served with rice or between slices of bread, a single can stretched into enough patties for the whole table. The price difference between mackerel and salmon was the difference between buying one can and buying two. Number 20, Spam fried in a skillet. A block of Spam sliced into thick rectangles and fried until the edges caramelized and the flat sides turned golden brown. Served on white bread or next to a scoop of rice, it was a hot meal that came together in less than 10 minutes. The can sat in the pantry for months without going bad, and when it finally opened, the whole block slid out with a sound every child in the house recognized. Fried Spam had a salt content that made water the only side dish it needed, but the frying changed the texture from soft and rubbery to crisp and almost bacon-like at the edges. One can could be sliced thin enough to stretch across 4 plates. Some mothers diced it into scrambled eggs on mornings when the egg carton was running low. But fried, with the edges darkened and the grease still popping in the skillet, it was a plate children asked for by name. Number 19, bread soaked in potlikker. Potlikker is the broth left at the bottom of the pot after greens have been cooked down. Collards, turnip greens, mustard greens, whatever was in season. The liquid that remained after hours of simmering with smoked meat and salt was dark, rich, and packed with the nutrients that had cooked out of the leaves. Most kitchens outside the South threw it away. In Black households, it was the second meal, a thick slice of cornbread or a piece of white bread dropped into a bowl of that broth and eaten with a spoon. Children who grew up on it remember the taste before they remember the greens themselves. The broth was salty and smoky, and the bread soaked it up until it fell apart in the bowl. Potlikker cost nothing because it was a byproduct of a meal that had already been made. The greens fed the family at dinner. The liquor fed them again the next day. In some houses, the pot stayed on the stove, and family members ladled out bowls across 2 or 3 days until the liquid was gone. The color deepened with every reheat, and by the 3rd serving it was almost black, thick enough to coat the back of a ladle. The families who saved potlikker were not following a nutrition plan. They were following a rule older than any cookbook. You do not pour anything down the drain that can still feed somebody. And in a kitchen that counted every calorie twice, that rule kept children full on nights when the greens themselves were already gone. A child who grew up drinking potlikker from a bowl did not know the word for thrift, but that child learned, without anyone saying it out loud, that a meal does not end when the plate is cleared. It ends when the pot is empty. Number 18, chicken backs and rice. The backs were the part of the chicken that the butcher practically gave away. Bony, with thin strips of dark meat clinging to the spine and enough fat to flavor a pot of water into something worth pouring over rice. A bag of chicken backs cost a fraction of what a whole bird went for, and in some neighborhoods, the butcher set them aside on Friday afternoon because he already knew who was coming for them. Simmered for hours with onion, garlic, salt, and pepper, the backs fell apart in the pot. The meat was not enough to fill a plate on its own, but the broth it produced was deep and dark and turned a scoop of plain rice into a meal that tasted like Sunday without the Sunday price. Children picked the small shreds of meat off the bones with their fingers and left the bones in a pile on the edge of the plate. The work of eating was part of the meal. Nobody rushed through a plate of chicken backs. The bones went into the trash strip completely clean. A child who finished that plate had earned the food, and every adult at the table understood the economics without saying a word. A whole chicken was for the house that could afford one. The backs were for the house that could not, and the broth those backs produced was proof that the lesser cut was not the lesser meal. The women who bought those backs were not embarrassed at the counter. They knew what a slow pot could do with a part of the animal that other shoppers walked past without looking down. The same bones could be simmered a second time the next day, weaker, but still worth pouring over a fresh pot of rice. 2 meals from a bag that cost almost nothing. The arithmetic was simple, and the women who did it never needed to write it down. Number 17, bacon grease toast. A slice of bread toasted under the broiler or held over the gas burner with a fork, then spread with a spoonful of bacon grease from the jar on the back of the stove. The grease melted into the warm bread and soaked through to the other side, and it tasted like salt and smoke and every breakfast that had come before it. Every black kitchen kept a jar or a coffee can of saved bacon grease near the stove. It was the cooking fat, the seasoning, and when there was nothing else, the meal itself. A child who came home from school hungry could toast a piece of bread and spread it with grease and have something warm in 2 minutes without asking anyone for help. The jar never went empty because every strip of bacon that ever touched the skillet left something behind for the next time somebody needed it. Number 16, bean soup from a ham bone. The bone saved from Sunday's ham, dropped into a pot of water with dried navy beans or great northern beans, and onion, salt, pepper, and whatever else was on hand. Simmered for hours until the beans went soft and the broth turned cloudy and thick from the marrow and the fat that melted off the bone. The ham bone was never thrown away after Sunday dinner. It went into the refrigerator wrapped in foil, and by Tuesday or Wednesday, it came back out and became the foundation of a meal that fed the family twice more. The beans swelled to 3 times their dry size. The soup thickened overnight in the refrigerator, and the second day's serving was always better than the first. Served with cornbread or a piece of bread on the side, a pot of bean soup stretched a single ham bone further than the ham itself ever reached. Number 15, government cheese sandwich. That 2-pound block of processed American cheese that came in the plain cardboard box from the commodity food program. It was bright orange, it melted like nothing else on the market, and every black child in a low-income neighborhood knew exactly what it looks like. Sliced thick and placed between 2 slices of white bread, it was lunch. Grilled in a skillet with butter, it was a hot meal. It was not fancy, but it was consistent. The government sent it because it was cheap to produce. The families who received it turned it into something their children looked forward to. That says more about the families than it does about the program. When the block ran out, children noticed. The sandwiches changed. The mac and cheese lost something. Nobody explained why, but every child in a commodity household understood the calendar by what was on the plate. Every one of these meals required a decision, not a recipe, not a trip to the store, but a decision made by someone standing in front of an open cabinet with not enough in it. The question was always the same: what can these ingredients become? Not what should they be, not what do the children want. What can they become right now with what is here? That question was asked in black kitchens across this country every single week for generations, and the answers, stacked up over decades, built an entire tradition of cooking that culinary schools have never taught and food magazines have never covered. The tradition has no name because nobody ever stopped long enough to name it. They were too busy feeding somebody. Number 14, flour gravy and biscuits. A skillet full of gravy made from nothing but flour, grease, water, salt, and pepper, poured over biscuits that came from the same pantry. Some houses called it sawmill gravy. Some called it poor man's gravy. Some did not call it anything because naming it would have meant admitting there was no meat in the house. The gravy started with whatever fat was in the pan. Bacon grease if there had been bacon earlier in the week. Lard if there had not. A few spoonfuls of flour stirred into the hot grease until it turned brown, then water or milk added slowly while stirring to keep it from lumping. Salt and pepper went in last. The result was a thick, pale gravy that tasted like warmth and salt and very little else, but it covered the biscuits and it filled the plate. The biscuits were made by hand in most kitchens. Flour, lard, baking powder, a pinch of salt, and just enough milk or water to hold the dough together, rolled out on a floured counter, cut with the rim of a glass, and baked until the tops turned golden. Every woman in the house had her own technique, and every child believed their mother's biscuits were the only ones worth eating. Together, the gravy and the biscuits formed a meal that cost almost nothing to produce. The flour was in the cabinet, the lard was on the stove, the baking powder was in the tin on the second shelf. No trip to the store required, no meat required, no explanation required. A plate of biscuits covered in flour gravy was breakfast on Saturday morning in houses where the paycheck had run out the night before, and the children ate it like it was a feast because nobody told them it was anything less. Number 13, fried egg sandwich. 1 egg cracked into a greased skillet, cooked until the white set and the edges went crisp, then placed between 2 slices of white bread with salt and pepper. That was a complete meal built from a single egg. When money was short, eggs were the last line of defense. A dozen cost less than almost any other protein in the store. 1 egg per sandwich meant a dozen could stretch through 12 meals on 12 separate days. Some children ate the sandwich with the yolk still running, the yellow soaking into the bottom slice of bread. Some mothers cooked the egg hard so it would survive the trip to school in a paper bag. The sandwich was plain and fast, and it stopped the questions about what was for supper before they started. Number 12, commodity canned stew. The canned beef stew from the commodity food box was thick, salty, and came in a can large enough to feed 2 or 3 children from a single pour. The meat inside was soft, and the vegetables had gone almost translucent from sitting in the broth. Heated in a pot on the stove, it filled a bowl and it was warm, and on certain evenings, that was the entire requirement. Some families poured it over rice to stretch it further. Some ate it with bread torn off the loaf and dipped into the broth. The commodity stew tasted different from any brand in the store, and children who grew up eating it could tell the difference without looking at the label. When the food box arrived, the canned stew was the first thing the children reached for because it was the closest thing in the box to a meal that did not need anything added to it. Number 11, cereal with water. A bowl of dry cereal with water poured over it instead of milk. The milk had run out 2 days before payday, but the cereal was still in the cabinet and the faucet still worked. The water did not turn the cereal into anything resembling what the box showed. The flakes went soft faster than they should have. The color stayed the same. There was no creaminess, just wet cereal in a bowl, eaten quickly before the texture disappeared entirely. Nobody talked about cereal with water at school. It was not a recipe that any mother passed down with pride. It was what happened when there was no milk and no money to get milk, and a child still needed to eat before the bus came. The cereal tasted like itself minus the one thing that made it good, and the child ate the bowl anyway because leaving the house hungry was worse than leaving it disappointed. Number 10, mustard sandwich. 2 slices of white bread with yellow mustard spread across both sides. No meat, no cheese, just the bread and the mustard. This is the one that makes people stop and stare because it sounds like it cannot be a real meal. It was. A mustard sandwich showed up in the hands of children who went to school with nothing else packed in the bag. It showed up at kitchen tables on the night before payday when every other option had already been used. The mustard was sharp enough to taste like something, and the bread was soft enough to feel like food. Nobody bragged about a mustard sandwich. Nobody had to. Everyone who ate one knew exactly what it meant. Number 9, spaghetti, not the Italian kind, the soul food kind. Elbow macaroni or thin spaghetti noodles, brown ground beef, a can of tomato sauce, ketchup, seasoning salt, garlic powder, onion powder, and sometimes a spoonful of sugar to cut the acid. This was a one-pot meal that every black household had its own version of. Some added bell pepper, some added a can of Rotel tomatoes, some topped it with a slice of government cheese melted across the top. A single pot made enough to fill every plate at the table and leave a bowl in the refrigerator for tomorrow. On the nights when ground beef was too expensive, the meat disappeared and the noodles absorbed the sauce alone. Nobody announced the substitution. The plate looked the same from across the room. The ingredients were interchangeable because the recipe was never about precision. It was about volume. It was about making sure the pot looked full when the children walked into the kitchen. Nobody ever sat down and calculated the cost per plate of these meals. But if somebody had, the numbers would have told a story that no economics textbook covers. A family of 5 eating 3 meals a day on wages that were never designed to stretch past Tuesday managed to produce plates of food that kept children growing, kept them showing up at school, kept them alive through decades of economic systems that were built to starve them out. The arithmetic was invisible but relentless. A mother counted eggs the way a banker counts interest. She knew how many servings were left in a bag of rice by weight, not by measuring. She knew which store marked down bread on Thursday and which church gave out canned goods on the first Saturday of the month. This was not budgeting. This was survival math, and she did it in her head every single day without a spreadsheet or a plan. Number 8, butter beans cooked slow, dried butter beans soaked overnight in a bowl of water and simmered the next day with salt, pepper, a piece of fatback or a ham hock if there was one, and enough water to cover them twice over. The beans swelled and softened across hours, and the broth surrounding them thickened until it coated the back of a wooden spoon. Served in a bowl with a wedge of cornbread, a pot of butter beans was supper for 2 or 3 nights running from a single bag that cost less than a carton of eggs. The beans had a starchy, creamy texture that made every spoonful feel heavier than it was. Children who claimed they did not like beans learned to eat butter beans because the alternative was going without, and going without was not something anyone at that table had the luxury of choosing. The pot sat on the back burner through the middle of the week, and each reheating made the broth thicker and the beans softer. By the 3rd night, the fatback had dissolved entirely, and the only trace of meat was the flavor it left behind in every spoonful. A mother who set a pot of butter beans on the stove on Monday afternoon was not simply cooking dinner. She was deciding the shape of the next 3 days. The beans would carry the house through Wednesday. The cornbread beside them would use up the last of the cornmeal. The fatback would give both of them a taste that plain water never could. No single ingredient in that pot cost much on its own. Together, in the slow heat of an afternoon, they built a meal that answered the question nobody in the house wanted to ask out loud. The pot answered it quietly before anyone had to. Number 7, Vienna sausages from the can. A small tin of soft pale sausages packed in broth, eaten straight from the can with fingers or a fork. No plate, no cooking, no preparation beyond peeling back the lid. Vienna sausages showed up in lunch boxes, in the back seat of the car on road trips, and on kitchen tables when nobody had the time or the groceries to cook a real meal. The sausages were salty and soft, and children either loved them or tolerated them, and either way, they ate the whole can. Some families fried them in a skillet to give them a crust. Some served them over rice. Most handed the open can to the child and moved on to the next problem. A single can cost almost nothing, and it sat in the pantry for months until the evening when almost nothing was exactly the budget. Number 6, grits for supper. Grits were a breakfast food to the rest of the country, but in black households where money was short, grits showed up at every meal. A pot of grits with butter and salt was dinner on the nights when there was nothing else to build a plate around. Some families topped them with canned tomatoes. Some stirred in a slice of cheese. Some just ate them plain with a piece of bread on the side. A bag of grits cost less than anything else in the store, and a single bag could last for weeks. Serving grits for supper was never a sign of failure. It was a sign that somebody stretched the week all the way to the end. The bowl was warm, the butter melted into the center, and a child who ate it did not ask questions about tomorrow. Number 5, commodity peanut butter on white bread. The peanut butter that came in the commodity food box was different from what the store sold. It was thick, grainy, and separated in the can with a layer of oil on top that had to be stirred back in. The taste was stronger and saltier than the name brands. Children spread it on white bread and ate it plain, no jelly, because jelly was a separate purchase, and some months it did not make the list. A single can of commodity peanut butter lasted for weeks. It filled a sandwich, it filled a stomach, and it showed up in every low-income household that qualified for the program. Some children ate it straight from the can with a spoon when nobody was watching. Number 4, red beans and rice. Dried red kidney beans, soaked and cooked low with onion, garlic, salt, and a piece of smoked sausage or a ham hock if the budget allowed it, served over a mound of white rice. In Louisiana and across the Gulf states, red beans and rice was Monday's meal because Monday was wash day and the beans could simmer unattended on the back of the stove while the laundry hung on the line. A pound of dried red beans cost next to nothing and tripled in volume during the cook. The rice underneath absorbed a thick, starchy broth until every grain was coated. A single pot fed the family for 2 days running. Children came home from school and the smell met them at the front door, and that smell meant the week had a plan and somebody had already started working it. The beans were cheap, the sausage was optional, the rice was the stretcher. Together they built a plate that outweighed every cent spent on it. Number 3, oatmeal for supper. A bowl of oatmeal with butter and sugar, served at the kitchen table at 6 in the evening. Oatmeal was supposed to be breakfast, but when the cupboard was nearly bare, it became whatever meal was needed. A canister of oats could produce dozens of servings, and each serving cost pennies. Some mothers added cinnamon, some stirred in a spoonful of peanut butter. Some served it plain and told the children it was porridge, because porridge sounded like something from a storybook instead of something from an empty kitchen. The children who ate oatmeal for supper did not complain. They understood, even at 5 and 6 years old, that supper was supper regardless of what was in the bowl. Nobody ever went to bed hungry on oatmeal night. Number 2, fried hot dogs. Hot dogs sliced down the middle or cut into coins and fried in a skillet until the edges blackened and the skin split open from the heat. Served on white bread with mustard or on a plate beside a spoonful of beans or rice. A package of hot dogs was one of the cheapest proteins on the shelf, and sliced thin enough, a single package reached every plate at the table. The frying made them taste different from the boiled version. The outside got crisp and the inside stayed soft, and the char marks gave them a flavor the packaging never promised. Children ate them with their hands straight from the skillet, burning their fingers on the edges where the skin had curled back. Some mothers cut them into coins and stirred them into macaroni and cheese or a pot of baked beans. Some served them alone on a plate with nothing beside them but bread. A fried hot dog on white bread was a full meal built from a few cents, and no child who ate one considered it going without. Number 1, a plate of whatever was left. This is not a recipe. This is the meal that happened when someone opened the refrigerator, looked at what was inside, and decided that no child in this house was going to bed without eating. A piece of cornbread from 2 days ago, a spoonful of rice from last night, a few bites of greens reheated in a pot, a slice of bread with the last scrape of butter. These plates never matched. Nothing on them went together, but a child sat down and ate every bite because somebody put it there, and that was enough. Rice and kidney beans was a hearty one-pot meal that filled bellies and stretched budgets further than seemed possible. Dried kidney beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until they became creamy and rich. Rice was served alongside or stirred directly into the beans, creating a complete protein that nutritionists would later praise, but mothers already understood. The dish was seasoned with cayenne and thyme, giving it warmth that radiated from the inside out. Children would eat multiple bowls, not realizing they were consuming one of the healthiest and most economical meals their mothers could provide. Louisiana traditions heavily influenced this dish, but it appeared in Black kitchens across the entire South. Rice and kidney beans proved that poverty could never diminish flavor or love. Before lunch, money was a guarantee. Syrup sandwiches filled the gap between hunger and the next real meal. 2 slices of white bread, a heavy pour of Cairo syrup or dark cane syrup, pressed together and wrapped in wax paper for school. The bread went soft and sticky within minutes, part of the appeal for little hands that liked pulling it apart in sweet, doughy strings. In the 1950s, a bottle of Cairo cost less than 20 cents and stretched across a week of snacks for 3 or 4 kids. Dark syrup carried a caramel note with a faint bitterness that balanced the sweetness. Light was milder, preferred by the younger ones. No one bragged about eating syrup sandwiches. It was the kind of snack made quietly on afternoons when the icebox held nothing else. But decades later, grown men and women speak of it with something close to reverence, because that sandwich meant somebody made sure you didn't go without.
Sausage patties made from scratch were the heartiest part of many 1960s Black breakfasts, the kind of food that made a child feel ready to take on anything the school day threw at them. Mothers seasoned the meat by hand with salt, pepper, sage, and whatever spices their own mothers had taught them to use. They shaped the patties carefully and laid them in the skillet, where they sizzled, browned, and filled the house with a smell that pulled children straight into the kitchen. These patties were crisp on the outside, juicy inside, and full of flavor you could not find in store-bought sausage. Kids sandwiched them in biscuits, crumbled them into grits, or ate them plain with their fingers when they were too hungry to wait for a fork. For mothers, making sausage from scratch was a way to stretch ingredients and control the flavor. For children, it was the taste of a real breakfast. As packaged sausage became easier to buy, homemade patties faded from daily life. But anyone who grew up eating them knows nothing beats the sound of sausage frying in a cast-iron skillet early in the morning. Fried apples with cinnamon turned ordinary mornings into something that felt like a holiday. Mothers sliced apples thin and let them cook down slowly in a skillet with butter or a little bacon grease, adding cinnamon and sugar until the whole mixture turned glossy and tender. The apples softened into something warm and sweet, the kind of side that made every child push their plate closer. Fried apples tasted like dessert disguised as breakfast, and they paired with everything: pancakes, biscuits, grits, or sausage. Kids begged for them because they made the house smell like comfort from the moment the skillet warmed. Even on the tightest weeks, apples were easy to find, and a handful of cinnamon could stretch the flavor far over time. Store-bought pastries replaced skillet fruits, and fried apples slipped away. But anyone who remembers eating them fresh knows they tasted like love cooked slow.
Tomato rice carried the bright tang of canned tomatoes mixed into fluffy grains, a dish that children either loved immediately or grew to crave. Mothers would saute onions in bacon grease until soft, then add canned tomatoes and let them break down into a fragrant sauce. Rice was stirred in and cooked slowly, absorbing every drop of that tangy, sweet liquid until each grain turned a beautiful sunset orange. Some families added sugar to balance acidity, while others preferred natural sharpness that cut through heavier dishes. It was often served alongside fried fish or pork chops, but children happily ate bowls of it alone. Tomato rice was inexpensive, using pantry staples that cost pennies but delivered comfort worth far more. This dish taught children that simple ingredients created memorable meals. Hoppin' John rice was more than food in African American households. It was tradition, luck, and heritage served in a single pot. Black-eyed peas simmered with ham hocks or bacon until tender, their cooking liquid becoming a rich, smoky broth. Rice was added directly to the pot, absorbing those flavors as it cooked until each grain was infused with the essence of pork and pepper. Mothers made this dish on New Year's Day for prosperity, but children begged for it year-round because the taste was simply irresistible. The peas were believed to represent coins, bringing fortune to those who ate them, but the real treasure was the flavor itself. Served with cornbread on the side, this was a complete meal that cost almost nothing to prepare. Hoppin' John connected generations, carrying recipes passed down through oral tradition. She never called it a recipe. Soft white bread, a thick spread of butter, and a generous shake of sugar pressed into the surface so it wouldn't fall off. That first bite was pure sweetness cut by the salt in the butter, the bread compressing under your teeth into something almost like cake. Across the 1950s and 60s, this was what mothers made when kids came in starving and dinner was still an hour away. No cooking, no planning, nothing that wasn't already on the counter. Some mothers sprinkled lightly, others buried the bread under a snowdrift of crystals that crunched with each bite. It was never served at gatherings, never mentioned proudly, but ask any black adult from that era and watch their face change. The memory isn't about the food, it's about hands moving fast between the counter and the table, making sure you had something sweet before the world asked anything else of you.
Fluffy biscuits with syrup or jelly were the breakfast treat 1960s kids begged for with wide eyes and hopeful voices, knowing their mother could see straight through them but might give in anyway. These biscuits were not the kind that popped out of a can. They were soft, hand-mixed, cut by a jar or a tin cup, and baked until their tops turned the faintest shade of gold. When they came out of the oven, the whole kitchen smelled like butter and warmth, the kind of smell that made children hover around the stove waiting for permission to grab one. Mothers split them open with their fingers, steam curling into the air, then drizzled syrup or spread jelly inside until the biscuit soaked up every bit of sweetness. Sometimes the syrup ran down the sides, and kids licked it from their hands without hesitation. These biscuits felt like a weekend, even on a weekday, like a celebration even when money was too tight for fancy breakfasts. Mothers made them because they filled stomachs and stretched ingredients, but children loved them because they tasted like happiness before school. As frozen biscuits and fast mornings took over, these tender homemade biscuits started to disappear. But for the generation who grew up on them, one bite still carries the memory of a warm kitchen, a busy mother moving with practiced grace, and the pure joy of getting the first biscuit straight from the pan.
Rice pudding for breakfast was a sweet morning treat that turned last night's leftover rice into something children woke up excited to eat. Mothers would warm the rice in a pot with milk, sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vanilla until it became creamy and fragrant. Some added raisins or a pat of butter, stirring until everything melted together into comfort. The pudding was served warm in bowls, sometimes with an extra drizzle of condensed milk for families who could afford the luxury. Children loved that something as ordinary as leftover rice could be transformed into dessert they were allowed to eat before school. This dish embodied the African American philosophy of wasting nothing and finding joy in reinvention. It was practical magic, turning yesterday's side dish into today's beloved breakfast. Long before snacks came in plastic wrappers, they came from the same pot that fed the family. Crackling bread was born on hog killing day when families rendered lard from pork fat, and the crispy bits left behind, cracklings, were folded straight into cornbread batter. The cracklings gave the bread a crunch plain cornbread never had, little pockets of salt and pork fat that burst between your teeth. This wasn't something learned from a book. You stood next to whoever worked the stove, watching her crumble the cracklings with her fingers, judging the batter's thickness by sight. Through the 1940s and 50s, in the rural South, hog killing meant every part of the animal fed somebody, and crackling bread was how the smallest scraps ended up on the table tasting richer than anything store-bought. Kids tore off corners still warm from the cast iron, eating it plain or crumbled into potlikker. The bread kept for days, growing denser with each one.
Smothered breakfast potatoes were the skillet hero of 1960s mornings, a dish that stretched a handful of ingredients into something big enough to feed everyone. Mothers sliced the potatoes thin, letting them hit the hot grease before adding onions, peppers, salt, and a little black pepper for heat. The skillet hissed, the house filled with the scent of frying potatoes, and sleepy children wandered into the kitchen even before they were called. The potatoes softened and browned, edges crisping, onions turning sweet, and the peppers melting into the mix. This was a breakfast you could eat alone or beside eggs, biscuits, or sausage, and it never disappointed. Mothers loved it because it was dependable and cheap. Children loved it because it tasted like comfort, disguised as something simple. A plate of smothered potatoes could fuel a child until lunch, carrying them through long mornings at school or long walks down dusty roads. Over the years, frozen hash browns and faster options took its place, but nothing compares to the taste of potatoes cooked slow in a cast-iron skillet by a mother who knew exactly when to turn them. For those who remember, one spoonful brings back the sound of sizzling grease and the warmth of a kitchen where breakfast meant love made visible.
Butter rice with fried eggs was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, depending on what the family needed and what the pantry held. Mothers would cook rice until fluffy, then stir in generous amounts of butter until each grain glistened and carried that rich, creamy flavor. A fried egg was placed. On top is runny yolk breaking open to create a natural sauce that children mixed eagerly into the rice below. Some mothers added a splash of soy sauce or a sprinkle of black pepper for extra depth. This dish was the answer when money was tight but bellies needed filling, providing protein and carbohydrates in one inexpensive bowl. Children loved the ritual of breaking the yolk themselves, watching it flow golden across the butter-slicked grains. It was honest, humble food that required no pretense but delivered complete satisfaction. Dirty rice earned its name from the ground meat and chicken livers that gave it a speckled, earthy appearance no child could resist. Mothers would brown ground beef or pork with finely chopped livers, onions, celery, and bell peppers until the mixture was deeply savory. Rice was cooked separately, then folded into the meat mixture with Cajun seasonings that brought gentle heat and bold flavor. The dish stretched a small amount of meat across a large pot, making it economical enough for weekly suppers. Children who claimed to hate liver never suspected it was hidden in every delicious bite, and mothers kept that secret with knowing smiles. Dirty rice was Cajun tradition, adopted and adapted by Black families throughout Louisiana and beyond. It proved that the best flavors often came from the humblest ingredients. Frozen Kool-Aid cups turned a 5-cent packet of drink mix into a summer business that kept entire blocks buzzing. Every neighborhood had a house where somebody's mama filled Dixie cups with Kool-Aid, stuck in popsicle sticks, and sold them off the porch for a dime. Cherry was the best seller, grape ran second, tropical punch was for the bold. You mixed it stronger than the packet said, doubled the sugar, poured slow so the stick stayed centered while the cups froze overnight. By noon, kids lined up on the sidewalk with coins earned sweeping porches or returning bottles. The trick was peeling the cup without breaking the ice. Squeeze just right, let the edges give, pull the paper down in one strip. Some bit straight through, others licked slow, letting the color stain their lips purple for hours. It was a childhood economy built on sugar, ice, and 5-cent packets, and every kid on the block knew exactly which house had the coldest cups.
Fried cornbread patties made from hot water bread were the quick, crispy breakfast that came together in minutes. Perfect for busy mothers who needed to feed many children before the day rushed in. Flour and cornmeal met boiling water until the mixture thickened into a dough that could be shaped right in the palm. The patties hit the skillet with a sizzle, frying in a thin layer of oil or bacon grease until the edges crisped and the centers stayed soft. Kids loved the sound as much as the taste. They begged for them with butter, with jelly, with a drizzle of cane syrup, or just plain hot from the skillet. These patties were the kind of food that taught children to appreciate texture. Crisp outside, tender inside, warm all the way through. Mothers made them without measuring because the recipe lived in their fingers, and every batch tasted slightly different depending on how much water or meal went in. Fried cornbread patties were fast, reliable, and comforting, the kind of breakfast that made sure no child walked out the door hungry. Even when grocery shelves brought new kinds of bread and packaged mixes, nothing matched the flavor of these simple patties eaten at the kitchen table while the morning light crept in. They tasted like survival, love, and tradition, all pressed into a single handful. Today, many children have never seen them cooked, but those who remember can still taste that first bite. The warmth, the crunch, the feeling of being cared for before the day even started.
Salmon croquettes over rice was Friday supper in countless Black households, a tradition born from Catholic neighbors and adopted for its economy. Canned salmon was mashed with eggs, onions, and crushed crackers, then formed into patties and fried until golden and crispy. These croquettes were placed atop mounds of fluffy white rice, their juices soaking into the grains below. Mothers stretched a single can of salmon into enough patties to feed an entire family, making it one of the most affordable protein sources available. Children loved the crispy exterior, giving way to tender, flavorful fish, especially when hot sauce was passed around the table. The dish connected families to coastal foodways and the resourcefulness of making canned goods. Feel homemade? This was frugal cooking that never tasted cheap. Peanut butter and jelly on saltine crackers was what happened when the bread ran out, but hunger didn't. You spread peanut butter on one cracker, grape jelly on the other, pressed them together, and hoped it held. It rarely did. The saltine snapped under the weight, and you'd eat the whole thing in pieces, licking your fingers between bites. But the salt cut through the sweet jelly in a way soft bread never managed. In the 1960s, a box of saltines cost 15 cents and peanut butter ran about a quarter, making this one of the cheapest protein snacks a mother could stock. Kids ate these after school, before dinner, and sometimes instead of dinner when weeks ran long. Crackers stayed crisp for weeks. Peanut butter didn't need the icebox, and the jelly lasted until the jar was scraped clean with a spoon.
Chocolate gravy over biscuits was the rare, magical breakfast that felt like a holiday, even on an ordinary morning. Mothers cooked cocoa, sugar, butter, and milk into a glossy gravy that poured hot over fresh biscuits. Children begged for it because it tasted like dessert disguised as breakfast, warm and sweet with a hint of chocolate that felt indulgent and unforgettable. It was not an everyday dish, just a sometimes treat, but those mornings became memories children still talk about decades later. The whole house lit up when someone whispered that chocolate gravy was coming, because everyone knew it meant the day was starting with joy instead of hurry. Mothers whisked the pot with careful hands to keep lumps from forming, and the smell drifted down hallways, pulling sleepy children to the kitchen before they were fully awake. The biscuits soaked up the gravy until they were soft enough to eat with a spoon, turning each bite into something warm enough to chase away cold mornings, and long after the plates were empty, the sweetness lingered, on tongues, in the air, and in the memory of a morning that felt like a gift.
The grocery list was never long enough. The meals showed up anyway. If you grew up eating any of these, make one this week. Not because you have to, but because somebody once made it for you when they did. Drop the meal your family stretched the furthest in the comments. The hands that built those plates are the reason every person watching this is still here.